Switch gears here to policy 346, the discipline system, and I'll recognize Dr. Cass for introduction.
Thank you. This policy was just published in, I think, in a fairly extensive rewrite, and it was just published at the end of July. And the purpose of the discipline policy, I'll read that, is to articulate approved disciplinary practices in response to sustained violations of APD SOPs. And it's the policy of the department to ensure that a fair and consistent disciplinary action is taken for sustained policy violations in accordance with the tenets of the progressive discipline that include the nature of the sustained violation, the employee's disciplinary history, and applicable mitigating and aggravating factors. So this is, I'm not quite sure what to say about this policy other than there has been a number of changes which narrow the definition of misconduct and create a more a better concept for progressive discipline. And then one of the things that was pointed out to me is that this does provide standards for suspensions of officers or for suspensions held in abeyance. And then it explains the aggravating and mitigating circumstances associated with offenses. So one of the interests of the CPOA here is in complaint investigations, and citizen complaint investigations involve at this point that are taken on by the CPOA investigators include some offenses which are defined in the appendix of this discipline policy, and which are essentially minor compared to the conduct, their officer conduct, as opposed to, let's see, what's the other term? Or they're not officer misconduct. They're more procedural sorts of problems. And what CPOA could benefit from in this policy would be to have those procedural problems that show up in citizen complaints be investigated by APD in the normal course of their or remedied, I guess, by APD in the normal part of their own internal discipline system. So I'm trying to think of an example here, but let's see, in 346, I'll show you the list of items that I'm talking about. There's a list of misconduct offenses and a list of performance offenses. And right now, misconduct offenses are the kind of things that can be, fairly serious and then relate to, and if those occur in a citizen complaint, then there would be there would be an investigation by the citizen complaint or by the investigation team for the CPOA. But if it's a performance situation, such as, some of these that are listed here, a driving violation, failure to upload OBRD, improper tagging of evidence, those tend to be performance related more specifically to APD, and they can be resolved, we think, more easily by APD actions rather than citizen complaints. So, or by investigating these as citizen complaints. So this is something that's been proposed along the way, but I would like to open that up for consideration and comment as well. And I see Commander Cottrell is here as well. So if he's a likely candidate for speaking to this issue.
Good evening, Chair and other board members. I can give a quick overview of the changes we made if you guys would like. Like Dr. Cass said, it was a very extensive rewrite of the policy. So if that's what you guys would like, I can do a quick overview of the major changes.
I think that'd be helpful.
I'll help you as much as I can.
As Dr. Cass said, some of the major things is, especially when it came to abeyance, that's been something that's been brought up in the last 3 or 4 IMRs, is the department using abeyance when it's suspending officers. So what I did in this policy is I actually limited the use of abeyance significantly. In the previous policy, there was actually no guidelines set for when abeyance could be used. It can be used at the discretion of the discipline authority. So what I did is I limited it to certain circumstances, and it can only be, they have to serve at least 80% of the original suspension, and they can't have a pattern before, anything like that. So that's actually a big major change in this policy compared to the old one. We did set up the 2 different categories, as Dr. Cass mentioned, for misconduct and for performance. The idea behind that is we explained how progressive discipline was going to be calculated more clearly in this policy compared to the previous one. In the previous policy, there was actually a lot of ambiguity on how progressive discipline was going to be calculated. We more clearly defined that, and we set up those 2 categories to be used as like offenses. For example, if an officer has a previous sustained violation for a misconduct and their current case is a performance case, then that previous case would not be used against them for progressive discipline. And also, as we are looking at cases where there's several sustained violations, as you guys see in the monthly report, there's often cases where there's 3 or 4 sustained violations. So we're actually going to have to go through those now and identify if they're misconduct, performance, how they can relate to each other. So it's very possible for an officer to get 2 written reprimands and a suspension out of a case. So I think what this is going to lead to going down the road is better documentation on an employee's retention card of the policies that they have violated and the discipline they've received. I know we've talked about this monthly about how we're not capturing the right data on our retention cards always, because if there's a 40-hour suspension issued in a case, not every single violation should be treated the same. So we shouldn't break it up as 10 hours for each of the 4 violations. Maybe one is way more egregious than the other, so that's where the suspension came from. So the policy will help us document that much better going down the road, especially in terms of progressive discipline. I also made major changes to the chart of sanctions on this policy, which is the first appendix. That was a big change. There was a lot of leeway in the old policy. For example, a first sanction 5 on the old policy was a range of 8 to 32, and it didn't give any guidelines on where you could land anywhere in there. So on this, what we actually created is a presumptive discipline for each sanction. And then if you're going to deviate from that presumptive, you will have to explain why you're either going to mitigate or aggravate that discipline. So once again, we're going to see a lot more consistent discipline. Not, hey, this guy got 8 hours suspension for the exact same policy that I violated, but I got 24 hours suspension. So that should go away. We also cleared up in that chart of sanctions the progressive discipline issue when you got past a 3rd offense of the same class sanction. In the old policy, that's all it accounted for was 3. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for a 3rd offense, a sanction 6, sanction 5, and so forth. In this one, we took it all the way out to where an employee would get terminated or dismissed from the department. So it shows that if an officer has a 6th offense, class 6 within a year, then they're going to get terminated. We don't need that officer. Obviously, they're not learning from their mistakes. They fail to comply with department orders. So we're going to dismiss them. So while it does seem a little lighter on the front end, it's actually, as an employee consistently violates policy, it actually is a lot harder on the back end and provides for more guidance when it comes to an employee that consistently violates policy. And those are kind of the major changes. We also explained PDHs in here a little bit better. We took them from 345 and actually put it in here where it kind of fit better with the flow of this policy.
Any place you'd like me to put this policy?
No, I'm good. Any questions?
Looks like Member Nixon.
Thank you. Thanks, Officer Cottrell. Quick question. When it comes to the dismissal or suspension of an officer, according to Section F of the 3-46 policy, in the second bullet or the second statement there, it says, upon dismissal from service, sworn personnel shall surrender their badge of office, their take-home vehicle, and all other department property. So when we say all other department property, natural assumption would be their firearm as well?
Oh, absolutely, sir. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And as far as, let me see, when it comes to lateral officers or transfer officers, let's say that they have discipline on their records from their previous employment. Are those, how do you view those? And I know that you may not be able to speak for hiring or anything like that, but if an officer comes in with maybe, and it may not be anything that's considered precluding them from being hired, but it could add to the chart, if you will, of violations when it adds up. How are those taken into consideration if those violations do occur while they're in office serving?
So current practice is not to use any previous discipline that they had received at another department. I know this came up at a board meeting a couple months ago, and I actually looked into this, how we do handle this on the department when we are hiring them. There actually is a national register that we do participate in New Mexico. So when an officer does lose their certification or anything like that, we do post to this national board the officer and the reason they lost their certification. So I did look into that for you. Now, as far as us using, let's say that a state police officer lateraled over, we would not use any discipline they received there for our discipline calculations. I don't know how that would work and if we could get those records from them to do that. I've actually never run into that, so I haven't thought about it, but that's actually something I am going to kind of look into now, because I could see how that it could be an issue if there was a pattern at the previous department and we're starting to see a couple violations here, how that could be an extensive pattern and we need to be aware of it. So actually, that is a good question that I'm going to look into for you.
So generally, if I may use the term, it's kind of like a clean slate when they come through. And that's kind of what you're looking for, because you're trying to get a lateral officer that has that clean record that they can kind of start their process of serving as an APD officer.
Exactly, sir. They come in with a new clean retention card on this department. Absolutely.
Gotcha. And as far as the national registry, if you do find an individual who's on that registry who's looking to be employed at APD, how does that affect their potential to be employed if they're on that registry?
I would hope, like I said, I'm not involved in the hiring process. I would hope if they're coming from another state, especially and their certification has been suspended or revoked in that state, I would hope that we wouldn't hire them. But once again, I have nothing to do with the hiring process.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Other comments or questions from the board or any panelists on this policy, 346 discipline? Not Member French.
I think you're on mute.
I was sorry about that. What did you say the website for registry was?
You know, I had it written down and it's in my office, and I will make sure I get that to you guys this week. I thought of that as soon as Member Nixon brought up this question. So I will get you guys the website and the registry name and all that information.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely, ma'am.
Looking for further comments on this, board members, panelists. Not seeing any at this time. So I think that concludes our discussion and possible action section here tonight. I don't believe any action from the board will be taken tonight, but I think this whole session here between these two policies has given the board a lot of information, and it's been an interesting discussion and a very useful discussion, I think, for myself personally, to hear the different perspectives of folks that are involved in this at many different levels. So I think that we want to thank the community and the public for the input that we're getting here tonight, and that we continue to get on other issues and other matters. And I want to remind the community and everyone involved here tonight that the board is always available for these kinds of comments and discussions, whether through the public comment session or through other means. You know, we can discuss how we can have a special meeting, that kind of thing, to discuss policies that are of additional relevance or additional importance that we want to review and spend extra time on. So I just want to remind that's always an option for board members to participate in that, and certainly for the community to be part of that discussion. So thank you everyone tonight for being involved in these, and certainly this won't be the end of this process. It is an iterative process, so this will continue on, and appreciate everyone participating tonight.